Empire. We're at the midway point of the NFL season, and what have we learned? What's up, everybody? It's Mike Jones. Thanks for coming back for another episode of the Football Jones podcast. You can read me at usatoday.com, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @ByMikeJones. Week 9 is in the books. We're officially halfway through, or just a titch. It was like midway on Sunday. The NFL reached the halfway point of its games, and then a couple more were played. So I think we're technically 52% through the NFL's 2020 season. And I wrote about my big surprises, big disappointments, things like that. You can go check that out on usatoday.com. But I really wanted to take a deep dive into this, and there's nobody better at pulling back the layers than Peter King. And so Peter King is my guest today. Very honored to have him. One of my idols coming up when I was a kid, deciding I wanted to be a sports writer. As you know, his column in Sports Illustrated was a must-read. Now he is with NBC Sports. His work is still a must-read. So Peter just has this amazing mind. He's got amazing connections, amazing insight, and he is going to break it all down for us right now. We're talking about what we've learned about the first half of the season, what stood out to him, what some of the questions going forward are for the remainder of this season. It's a real treat. Let's get going right here. Okay, and here we are as promised. Very honored to have the GOAT, Peter King, Football Morning in America, columnist for NBC Sports. You know who he is. Just very happy that we can glean from his knowledge for a few minutes here on the first half of the season. Peter, how are you?
I'm great, Mike. Thanks a lot for asking me.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this. Has been a weird year, a year like we have not seen off the field and compelling on the field as well. So I kind of wondered, what is your impression of this season been? And what, you know, we want to talk about kind of what some of the storylines that really have intrigued you are. But just briefly, kind of an overview, what have you made of this season so far?
Well, I'm pretty surprised that we're 52% of the way through the regular season, and there are no games that are still hanging in the balance. Every game continues to be scheduled, and there are 8 weeks left in the season, in the regular season, and everything is on course. However, with a capital H, I think it would be unrealistic to expect that the last 8 weeks of this season will be played as normal. As we look and see every day that there's 100,000 more cases of COVID in the United States, and look and see that, for instance, last Friday, Mike, in a memo sent out around the NFL, which it happens every day, there were 15 documented positive tests on Friday alone. That's not just players. That's also, you know, the tier 1 people around the league, the coaches, the equipment staff, the people who touch the players every day. And we're just getting into the heavy part of the pandemic. If I could just say one other thing that I think sort of intrigues me about this season, it's that here we are on, approaching the middle of November. Does anybody really know and really feel good about who the best team is?
Right.
I mean, we've just seen the Pittsburgh Steelers, off to the greatest start in their history, struggle mightily to beat a very flawed Dallas team. We've seen the Kansas City Chiefs, who, I mean, Patrick Mahomes is getting to be Michael Jordan. He just is. But, I mean, they almost lost to the Carolina Panthers, you know? Yeah. And I just don't think, and then you see the Bucs, and everybody liked the Bucs, but you see them and they just get their clocks absolutely cleaned, at home by the Saints. So I think one of the things that makes for good ratings, makes for good TV, makes for fan suspense is not knowing the outcome of what's going to happen. And I don't know anybody right now who can tell you with any confidence that they know what's going to happen in the next 8 weeks.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's been pretty fascinating. And then, like you said, this Pittsburgh Steelers team, they've got that perfect record, but they definitely are a flawed squad. But the one thing that impresses me is that they always seem to find a way. And I guess that's a credit to Mike Tomlin, to the leadership, to the experience that Big Ben has, and just the talent they have, the young talent, the versatility they have on defense. But, yeah, I don't look at them and think, man, that is a great team, even though they've got a great record right here.
Look, I think, Mike Tomlin is a terminally underrated coach. And, I remember a couple of years ago talking to Bill Parcells about all the young phenoms who were being hired. Sean McVay and then Zach Taylor, Matt LaFleur, a year and a half ago or whatever. I mean, and McVay obviously has been longer than that. But I remember one of the things he said to me that day is he said, it's fine to hire really brilliant minds and people who can game plan up a storm and all that. But he said a head coach's job is not, his biggest job is not, calling plays and going down and get your fingers dirty, hands dirty in play calling, things like that. It's running your franchise, being the weather vane for the franchise, and being the guy who runs everything in your shop. And I mean, obviously when Al Davis was alive, that wasn't the case with the Raiders, but for the vast majority of NFL teams, the head coach is the CEO and the COO at the same time. And so I think Mike Tomlin, what makes him so good is that, and we'll use Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown as examples. When he lost those two guys basically in back-to-back years, you say, well, boy, I'll tell you what, they're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So what do? They move on. There's a Steeler way. We're going to win whoever is in those uniforms, because we're going to find a way to win. And look, I agree with you, Mike. It's just, I think they're a flawed team, but then they've beaten consecutively on the road, Tennessee, Baltimore, and obviously a much flawed Dallas team, but a Dallas team that I think would have beaten a lot of teams on Sunday. And look, the object of the game, did you get the win or did you not? And right. Pittsburgh's getting it.
Yeah. When you talk about the Chiefs, obviously they lost to the Raiders. They had a close call yesterday with the Panthers. I sometimes get the sense that they're almost kind of tinkering and experimenting each week, saying, hey, can we win this way? Can we do it this way here? And that we're not seeing them really open it all up yet.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I continue to wonder, because I think I forget how many. I think Le'Veon Bell had like 4 yards on Sunday when they scored 33 points. So you just say, well, either he has no role in this offense and they're not really interested in him having a big role because they like Clyde Edwards-Helaire more. He's just an insurance policy. Mm-hmm. Or exactly as you say, they're tinkering with things. And Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, and Frank Kafka, the quarterback coach, are sitting in Andy Reid's office. I guarantee you, they are sitting in his office, and will be, even though they have the bye this week. They're going to be sitting in there saying, how can we use Le'Veon Bell to win games? Mm-hmm. And so, I don't think this ends up like a Shady McCoy deal, Mike, where Shady McCoy just goes there and all of a sudden he kind of falls off the face of the earth. I think they're going to find a way at some point down the stretch of this season, because they've got sort of a strange schedule. They come back from their bye. They're at Vegas, at Tampa, and then back-to-back in December, at Miami, at New Orleans. So this is not going to be a mail-it-in back half of the season for Kansas City. They got some tough games.
who were some of the teams or figures who have surprised you the most this year for the good? And we'll talk about the disappointments in a little bit, but when you look at all the teams, the players, the way things have played out so far, who's been a surprise for you?
Well, the first one will probably surprise you because he's on a losing team, and that's Joe Judge. I think one of the things he has done is he's gone in and taken a sunken franchise by the throat. And he said, this is the way we're going to do it. If you're not on the boat, we'll leave you at the port. But we are doing it this way. He did it with Golden Tate, a guy who definitely could have made some plays to help them win on Sunday in Washington. Turns out they didn't need him, but they left him home because of a discipline issue. I would point to three other sort of positives that I see. I mean, number two would be Dalvin Cook. Mm-hmm. And, to me, I think one of the things that Mike Zimmer demands of his offense is we're not turning the ball over, period. Right. And if we turn it over, we're going to make major changes. And you've seen in the last 2 weeks when Kirk Cousins has thrown 14 and 19 passes respectively in the last 2 weeks, you've seen now that they have gone totally in Dalvin Cook's corner with an assist to Alexander Mattison, who I think is the best backup running back in football. But so I think the Vikings now, even though they're 3-5, they're not out of it.
Right.
They are not. I'm not saying they're going to win their division, but I think that they still have a beating heart of a wild card chance. The third thing I would point to is Baltimore. I think one of the things you see when they go to Indianapolis, which is their most dangerous road game other than Pittsburgh left on their schedule, they go to Indianapolis and they hold them to 10 points. They score 7 points on defense. Really did not let Indianapolis breathe. They're showing you that, look, we do not have to rely on Lamar Jackson to win our games. Our defense can win games too. And then finally, I think I would say that the Miami Dolphins, Miami will make the playoffs, Mike. I don't know whether they're going to win their division, doubtful, but they will make the playoffs. After winning their last four, I'd say those are the 4 or 5 things in the NFL that I think have surprised me for the positive.
Gotcha. For Baltimore, with that defense, like you said, they're not as reliant on Lamar. But what do you think has to happen so that way, when they play a team where they're behind, that they can still be effective? Because we've seen when they fall behind, it's a struggle for them offensively. But bolstering that defense, I think, does help them a bit. What do you see?
I really think if you look back to the end of the Pittsburgh game and you saw when Baltimore's in the red zone, it's 4th down and Lamar is stretching to try to get the first down. Mm-hmm. And he fumbles and he loses the fumble. It doesn't matter because he wouldn't have made it. It was 4th down. Right. And he didn't make the first down. But that's a great example of Lamar Jackson needing the light bulb to go off a little bit in his head now. Mm-hmm. And that is, just like we talked about with Minnesota and Kirk Cousins, you simply absolutely 100% cannot turn it over 3 or 4 times in a game. Right. And Lamar Jackson, unfortunately, that has been a bit of an issue for him in the 2 big losses that they've had this year. And so I kind of look at him as he's still a work in progress. I thought he played a very good second half at Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. I'm not absolutely down on him. I'm a little concerned about him. Right. Because of his play in some of the big games. But, I also think back to last year when in the big games against New England, Seattle, San Francisco, he was great. Mm-hmm. So I think that these are little snapshots in time that he's got plenty of time to get over. And I wouldn't feel panicky at all about Lamar Jackson.
What about Miami appeals to you? I love the way Brian Flores has really changed the mindset of this team. Their defense, I think it's 14 straight games now that they forced a turnover. Their leading scoring defense. But just the courage it took for him to make that move to go to Tua that was kind of risky, a little bit of a roll of a dice, but I feel like he's just got a great feel for how he wants that team to look and how he wants to lead.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is, I think the one part of that decision that really did not get much attention, and again, it's not overwhelming, but I do think that one of the things that Brian Flores thought when he looked at his team is that, Ryan Fitzpatrick in a season and a half had turned it over 22 times. He threw 20 interceptions, in his time as quarterback, whatever it was, 22 games or whatever is since the start of last season was. And that he didn't play them all because obviously Josh Rosen played some.
Right.
But the one thing I think about Tua, even though we have a very small sample size, I think Brian Flores thought that Tua was going to take care of the ball better. And again, it's only been 2 games, but he has not thrown a pick yet. But the thing that really impresses me about Miami as we sit here right now is that I think that they are a rising defense. And you may not have been able to tell it by, the play yesterday in Miami or in Arizona. But I do think that if you look at it as a whole, this is a team that has allowed 14 points a game over the last 4 games. They've had 3 decisive victories in their last 4 games, all wins. And I think they are rising at the right time with a young defense. Nobody knows half these guys. Emmanuel Ogbah has been reborn after not getting a long enough leash in Cleveland and just having a cup of coffee really in Kansas City. But he's got a chance now to be one of the best edge players in football. And so I just think now you look at their team and I just sort of trust Brian Flores and I kind of trust what they do.
What do you think it is about him? We've seen a lot of Bill Belichick assistants go elsewhere and not have the success. What is it that makes Flores possibly the exception to that trend?
I think a couple of things. One, and again, I do not know Brian Flores well at all, but it always helps when you get to go to a team where you and the general manager and the personnel side of the building are absolutely on the same page. And he's on the same page with Chris Grier.
Right.
And I think that really helps. But I think the other thing that has helped him a lot is that he has not tried in any way to be Belichick. And I think sometimes when you come from that tree and the only person who's basically trained you in football is Bill Belichick. Brian Flores, the people who know him well say he has not changed one bit. Even in front of the team, he's the same guy who was in front of the team in New England and has not tried to be Bill Belichick. I think in some ways that has hurt other coaches who've left Belichick. I'll say one other thing about Flores. Although he is the great beneficiary of draft pick largesse that Chris Grier has pulled off, I'll also say that Brian Flores would not have wanted to trade Laramie Tunsil.
Yeah.
I doubt he would have wanted to trade Kenny Stills. I doubt, even though he wasn't getting along at the end, or the organization wasn't with Minkah Fitzpatrick. I mean, he wants a Minkah Fitzpatrick on his team,
right.
But he viewed that for the long haul, that what they can get draft choice currency wise was going to be better than having those guys. And I think so far he's been proven right. I mean, they're 10-7, I think, in the last calendar year. And I think they're absolutely on the right track, especially now that, Tua's got to play a while more, but
right.
Now that they seem to have their quarterback of the future.
What have been some things that have really been disappointing to you? I mean, I know there's a number of things, that probably stand out, but what are a couple of things that you really thought was going to do a little differently than what it has been?
Last night when I put X marks on 6 little teams, and I'll give you a sentence or two on each one. I did not think that the New York Jets were going to fall to earth with as big a thud as they did. And I've got nothing against Adam Gase, but they've got to make a change at coach. Absolutely, unequivocally, have to make a change at coach. I think that what happened in Houston with Bill O'Brien getting fired after only 4 games absolutely had to happen. I just hope that Deshaun Watson can get a head coach who he absolutely trusts and who knows that for the next probably year and a half, you're going to be way behind the 8 ball because you're not going to have a lot of draft choices. But I still think Houston's going to be an attractive job, Mike, because they have the one thing that is the hardest thing to find in football, and that's a franchise quarterback. I think the inconsistency of Denver worries me. Their defense has been very, very up and down, as has Drew Lock. I expected them to be better. The Cowboys, obviously, but it bothers me. Their effort bothered me until yesterday.
Right.
Like, I think Ezekiel Elliott has been borderline awful for most of the time this year. Clearly helped them lose with his fumbling against Arizona. Did not play well at all against Washington in another embarrassing loss. So Mike McCarthy has got to do a good job in the second half of this season. They're not going to save their season,
right,
but he's got to do a better job of establishing himself as the long-term leader of this team. The failure of the Bears to get the quarterback to play well or get the quarterback to even play at a C+ level is quite frankly infuriating. You've got a guy who was probably the chief Andy Reid disciple, in Matt Nagy, and it's just plain weird how quarterbacks have performed so terribly in Chicago. And then I think finally what I would say is San Francisco is a negative almost through no fault of their own.
Right.
It's been a long time since I've seen a team as beat up and as sort of besmirched by COVID as the 49ers have been. And look, all I can say is if you do not have what I consider to be your 4 best players or 4 most important players, and that is, Richard Sherman on defense, who, obviously has been a great player for so long. And to me, also sort of almost the spiritual leader of that team. If you don't have him and, you don't have Bosa rushing the passer, there's your 2 biggest guys on defense. Mm-hmm. And then you don't have Garoppolo and Kittle on offense. Just, how would you expect to be competitive in the best division in football? So I don't blame the 49ers, but that's been a very, very weird year for them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. That Super Bowl team, that the runner-up, that, the Super Bowl hangover, legend is actually, it's unfortunate because I really thought that maybe they would have a chance to defy that and continue to compete. But then when everything kind of has fallen apart from just week 1 on, I was like, man, they just can't catch a break. What do you think it is about Ezekiel Elliott why is he playing so poorly? Is it just the fact that the system, Mike McCarthy, doesn't really have a track record of strong running back, friendly offense? What do you think it is?
Well, when I look at, I watched a lot of their loss to Washington. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there was one play in that game that if I were Mike McCarthy, it would have absolutely infuriated me. And that is the play. You may remember it, Mike, when basically Elliott was assigned blitz pickup, okay, and a young linebacker named Cole Holcomb came through the right guard tackle hole, and he was bearing down on Andy Dalton. And this was the game, obviously, Dalton got the concussion. But he's bearing down on Andy Dalton, and he steamrolled Ezekiel Elliott like he weighed 120 pounds, and he sacked Andy Dalton. It was, honestly, if I were Ezekiel Elliott, I would have been not just kind of, oh man, I screwed that. I'd have been embarrassed. I'd have been totally embarrassed. And that comes on the heels 6 days after he fumbles twice in the first half against Arizona. He has to be the great offensive force to prevent this team from spinning out of control. And in the first half of the season, he just wasn't.
What has been the craziest season that you've covered? How many years have you been covering the league now?
36.
36. What's been the craziest year that you've covered?
There's no question it was 1987. Okay. Because in 1987, the NFL played 2 regular season games to start the season. And then the players went on strike. Mm-hmm. And they were locked out by teams. So for the next 3 weeks, NFL teams invented squads of replacement players through many semi-pro players. I mean, the Buffalo Bills left tackle when Lawrence Taylor crossed the picket line in week 5 that year was a truck driver from Southern Illinois. And it was the weirdest time you've ever seen. Teams that invested a lot of time and energy scouting the bush leagues of minor league football ended up playing well and winning. And that was the year Washington won the Super Bowl, in part because far and away, Washington and San Francisco had the 2 best strike teams in football. But the 2 other interesting things about that season were Mike Ditka was the coach of the Bears, and one of his quarterbacks on the 1987 Chicago Bears was a young kid who'd played professional football in England from Eastern Illinois named Sean Payton.
Wow.
And so, I mean, those were the kind of stories.
Yeah.
And at the time I was covering the New York Giants. And I remember one day Parcells, who thought that this was the most bush league thing on the planet, having to coach these guys there was a semi-pro team in Connecticut called the West Haven Giants. Uh-huh. And so the Giants just saw one of their games and signed about 10 of their guys for their team. But Parcells once told me that his wife, during that first week when they had to prepare this strike team, Parcells slept through the alarm. And his wife woke up and started crying and said, "You're not going, are you? You're not going today." And he goes, "I'm going." And so he got up and bitterly went to the office to prepare to play with a bunch of, guys. But, as strange as this is, wondering whether every week the games are going to get played because of a pandemic,
right?
That was pretty strange.
Yeah. At least you recognize these players and coaches.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, can I tell you one other quick thing that
sure.
You'll love?
Yes.
You'll love this. So my first year covering the NFL was 1984. I covered the Bengals in Cincinnati for the Cincinnati Enquirer. And I moved to New York in 85. But in 1984, that was Boomer Esiason's rookie year. So I got to know him pretty well that year, and I kept in touch with him and all that. So in 1987, the biggest bone of contention in the entire league that year was Boomer Esiason and the very, very militant union people in Cincinnati against the strike team of the Bengals. And one day, the strike team came in every day on a bus from wherever they were staying in a hotel. And Boomer Esiason, who a year later would be the MVP of the NFL, laid down in the middle of the street.
What?
So the bus could not get into the Bengals facility. So, I mean, Mike, we talk about, will a game be played this weekend? That just simply does not compare to 1987.
No. Not at all. Wow. Just the mental images seeing Boomer Esiason laying on the ground in front of a bus.
Boomer Esiason being Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah. So we don't know how this year is going to wind up. We don't know if it's going to be 18 weeks. They have to tack on. We don't know if it's just going to end and then they have an expanded playoffs. We don't know if the Super Bowl is going to happen right on time. But if you had to predict football-wise how this ends, your teams that are still left standing, what do you think, and how does these picks compare to the way you opened the season?
Well, at the start of the season, I picked Tampa Bay and Baltimore. And it wouldn't shock me if either team made the Super Bowl. And I'm not one to throw Tampa Bay out with the garbage because they just got totally embarrassed this week. Mm-hmm. It's only been 3 weeks since they totally embarrassed the Green Bay Packers. So, things change a lot in football. But I think if I had to pick right now, and it's tough to pick somebody in the NFC, but if I had to pick right now, I'd pick a Kansas City-Seattle Super Bowl. The reason I would pick Seattle is that even though I'm depressed about their defense, I think that when you get a Jamal Adams, and I think they're going to be getting Snacks Harrison, for the middle of their defensive line to really help them stop the run better. When you have both of those guys playing, relatively speaking, at a high level, who knows health-wise how Jamal Adams really is. Mm-hmm. But my feeling is if you get both of those guys playing and contributing in that defense, I think they're going to be good enough to win, in my opinion, what is a flawed NFC. I really like the Saints, obviously, but I just wonder defensively whether they're going to be able to hold up and continue the way they played at Tampa.
You still love what you do?
I really love what I do. I'm surprised that I love it, even though I'm probably not going to leave my Brooklyn apartment much, if at all, this season. That kind of bums me out because, Mike, one of the things that is a big disadvantage in doing the thing that you and I do is that it's difficult to not be able to go into a locker room and have a sidebar conversation with a guy maybe you've known for a long time. Yeah. Because the NFL basically is allowing mostly Zoom calls, but I still get to talk to people alone on the phone, which helps. But I just think it's different. Yeah. I think back to the Super Bowl when at the end of the Super Bowl, maybe 75 minutes after the game, I'm sitting in Andy Reid's office at Hard Rock Stadium with the door closed, just me and him, and he's drawing up the play that changed the course of that Super Bowl. And I used it in my column on Monday. And again, I'm not saying, boy, how great am I? When I make that point to basically say, those are the kind of things in large part that we're going to be missing as the games get much, much bigger and the stakes get higher as this season goes on. That's the part that is the saddest for me. We'll all live. We'll all be okay. But I do think there's something really missing in the coverage of the league this year that is sort of sad, both not only for us, obviously, but for the fans too, because I think they're getting less insight on what's really going on out there.
Yeah. One last question for you. You have always been someone who is able to pull back that curtain and take people inside. When was it in your career that you figured out, hey, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is the way I'm going to go about just really carving out my place in this industry?
I think the biggest, where that really was impactful to me, and I'm really going to age myself, it was 25 years ago this season. In 1995, I went in the off season that year looking for a team that would allow me access to 1 week inside their team for the season. I could see everything. I wouldn't, the coach couldn't say to me, you can't go there. Coach just had to trust me that I was going to tell the story of what I saw. And I talked to maybe 10 or 12 teams. And finally, Mike Holmgren of the Packers said, I'll let you do it. Now, remember, Mike, that was before Favre was a celebrity of the highest magnitude. And that was the year he won his first MVP. So it was in October of that season. And it was just an odd way to walk into a team and to be around Brett Favre in his house when he's, waking up or putting his feet on the floor and just being in pain. And just but anyway, what that really convinced me that year, doing that. I got a lot of notice for doing that. And what convinced me is that, hey, I'm not saying nobody else is doing that, but people don't do this. And I'm going to try, if I can, to kind of make it my thing. So over the years, when I started the MMQB at Sports Illustrated in 2013, I worked diligently. I worked probably for 3 months total to convince a team to allow me to show their training camp opening team meeting on our site. And Jerry Jones allowed it. Jason Garrett allowed it. He had some regrets about it, but he allowed it. And 35 minutes, we have you can go find it. You can watch the Dallas Cowboys training camp opening team meeting in 2013, if you care. You'd find that just by Googling it.
Right.
The other point I guess I would make is it isn't just saying, hey, look what great access we can get. It's honestly, Mike, to say, I really want to take you somewhere where you haven't gone, where you can't go. Like I did a story on a week in the life of an officiating crew in 2013. That was probably the most fun of any story I've done in my life. Not because Gene Steratore was a wonderful guy or anything, but I was behind a curtain that nobody's ever, I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't know that anybody has ever taken a week. And I spent one day with the back judge in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I spent a day with 5 different officials on the crew, just seeing what their life is like. But I really want to be able to tell people things that they don't know and what they've never seen before. And that's really what kind of makes me the happiest about if I can do my job and I'm able to do that.
And you do it better than anybody else. I mean, you're just an inspiration for everybody's trying to, learn. Every time I always read and learn from you and have for years. And just like, man, you just blow me away with your insight and your knowledge. Cause I will watch the same game and talk to people and I'm like, Dad, gone. I didn't notice that, and your observation. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mike.
And I appreciate you giving us some time here for the podcast because it's a real treat to my listeners. So
hey, thank you, Mike. You have a great week and you're doing a great job at USA Today. I really enjoy reading you. I am behind the paywall, so I'm being a good, loyal reader / investor. So thanks for your insight as well.
I appreciate that. And, it's been sad not to see you on the road and everything, but good to see your face here. And hopefully one day we'll be back to normal and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks very much, Mike. Have a great week.
All right. Thanks, you too. All right. A big thank you to Peter King. If you are not following him on Twitter, not checking out his work every single Monday morning when his column comes out, really breaking down all the action on Sunday, you are missing out, and you need to make sure you go make that a regular habit if you are a football fan of any team, because he takes a wide look spanning the globe, the football globe. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for listening again. You can read me at usatoday.com. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram @ByMikeJones. And I will talk to you guys again next time.